Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere filthy foggy and fantastically fascinating, the soot-choked heart of Victorian London. Imagine you've just woken up in a cobblestone alleyway, boots pinched too tight, your lungs already protesting the air. Because yes, that's not mist, it's smog. A thick yellow-brown haze clings to everything, and your first breath tastes like coal smoke with a hint of horse. Welcome to 1850s London. You probably won't survive this. But don't worry, we'll try. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from and what time it is where you are. Drop it in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You blink against the haze as carriages rattle by wheels, squeaking drivers shouting over the din. It's morning though, you wouldn't know it from the sky. The sun's up there somewhere, just smothered beneath London's infamous pea soup fog. This isn't a rare weather event. It's daily life, courtesy of coal furnaces in every home factory and workshop. By 1854, the city burns millions of tons of coal, annually filling the air with sulfurous soot and particulates. People cough, a lot. Your lungs. They're not ready. As you take a tentative step, your boot squishes into something unpleasant. No, not mud. More like a foul blend of horse droppings, spilled beer, and rain-soaked ash. The streets are a sensory gauntlet. Children dart between carts, snatching fallen apples, or chasing rats, and market vendors holler in thick accents, selling everything from fresh eels to recycled soap. You hear one yell, "Night soil for sale." Do not ask. You don't want to know. People hurry past you in layers of drab wool and soot-dusted bonnets, barely noticing the dazed time traveler in their midst. They're too busy surviving. And most of them start early. Chimney boys, some as young as 6, already climb into flues with sooty faces and burlap shirts. Fishwives hack open crates with calloused hands, slinging herring into piles. A one-legged man polishes shoes on the corner, while nearby, a butcher tosses entrails into the gutter. The city stinks in ways no modern deodorizer could ever conquer. Imagine damp rot mingled with rotting cabbage horse stables, tanneries, and human sweat. Add a dash of coal smoke and the occasional dead animal, and that's just the high street. If you think a nice river breeze might help prepare for a disappointment, the Thames is nearby, and it's a liquid nightmare. By this decade, it's famously been described as a stagnant black ditch. But we'll get to that later. You move down a narrow alley, the kind they call a rookery. Think overcrowded slum meets vertical maze. Crumbling brick buildings lean toward each other, like gossiping old ladies blocking out the sun. Here, you spot some early risers, boiling clothes in iron pots. Others are still sleeping, huddled on stoops, or curled inside half-barrels. And rats. Oh yes. More than people, probably. One man stumbles out of a gin shop and vomits beside your boot. It's 7 a.m. You're beginning to realize that time travel isn't the magical escape it seemed. It's cold, it's grimy, and it smells like disappointment and lard. Still, the city has a pulse. Beneath the grime and the grief, something thrums, a chaotic gaslit rhythm of survival, of horse hooves on cobbles, distant church bells, and the whisper of starched skirts brushing past. Victorian London is enormous, more than 2.5 million people by mid-century, making it the largest city in the world. Yet privacy is rare. You're constantly jostled, watched, brushed against. Even your thoughts feel crowded. Historians still argue whether this era was humanity's industrial triumph or its urban nightmare. Truthfully, it's both. A place of invention and inequality, progress and poverty, hope and filth, wrapped in fog and flavored with soot. You find a bench. It's damp, of course. A newspaper flaps by in the wind. The Illustrated London News, boasting sketches of Queen Victoria and a two-headed goat. You're tempted to read it, but your hands are already stained from the ink. Also, the paper smells like fish. So, this is your new world. No Google Maps, no breathable air, no idea how to get a decent cup of coffee. You'll need to learn fast. And we'll start with your first real challenge, getting dressed without accidentally dying. Stay with me. You wake to a loud clang. Someone's banging on a pipe nearby. And remember, with a grim flutter of disbelief, that you are still in Victorian London. Your first challenge of the day, getting dressed. But not in jeans and a t-shirt. No, in the complicated, restrictive, and occasionally flammable wardrobe of the mid-19th century. Let's start with undergarments. Yes, multiple. For men, you'll need a long shirt tucked into drawers, which are basically woolen boxer briefs, but somehow more humiliating. Women begin with a chemise and then step into corsets stiff with whalebone and social pressure. These are not for comfort. They're for structure, posture, and apparently internal organ rearrangement. Next come petticoats plural. These layers of linen or flannel act like insulation and modesty shields. Then, for the height of fashion, women wear crinoline's wide hoop skirts made of horsehair and stiffened cotton, later replaced by steel hoops. They're enormous, they're unwieldy, and yes, they're wildly flammable. Between 1850 and 1865, thousands of women died when their skirts caught fire from candles, fireplaces, or even just brushing past a stove. Florence Nightingale herself warned against the deadly nature of light muslin and crinoline. So, as you shuffle into your corseted tent, remember any open flame is now your mortal enemy. Men don't have it easy either. Their outfits involve tight wool trousers, starched shirts, waistcoats, and top hats so tall you risk knocking them off on door frames. Collars are stiff enough to double as neck braces, and many gentlemen use cravats or ascots tied so tightly they can cut off circulation. Add a pocket watch and cane, and you're fully prepared for a heat stroke. Don't forget shoes. Leather boots, often ill-fitted and handmade, squeak with every step and pinch cruelly at the toes. Socks are woolen, always, even in July. And if you think deodorant will save you, think again. The best you can do is a lavender sachet tucked under your arms and hope for mercy. For the wealthy, A lady's dressing routine can take over an hour with the help of a maid. But you, time traveler, have no such luxury. You fumble with buttons. There are so many buttons. Lace your boots and attempt to fasten a bonnet that seems more like a ship's sail than a head covering. It flops sideways. Perfect. Historians still debate whether Victorian clothing was deliberately torturous or just a reflection of aesthetic ideals gone mad. Either way, it serves its purpose to signal status, conceal skin, and remind you constantly that comfort is for the lower classes. But what if you're not aristocracy? If you're among the working poor, and odds are, your options are fewer. You wear the same garments day after day, maybe a spare shirt, if you're lucky. Clothes are patched until they resemble a quilt. Shoes are handed down until the soles give up entirely. If you're a child, expect bare feet even in winter. The streets teem with people in threadbare coats, kerchiefs wrapped around faces to filter the smog. Workers roll up their sleeves to reveal soot-blackened arms. No one looks entirely clean. Even the upper crust walks through the same filthy streets, though their boots get polished afterward. And speaking of polish, there's a booming trade in appearance. Shoe blacks, wig makers, corsetiers, and laundresses all serve the Victorian obsession with external decency. Your drawers may be crawling with lice, but your collar must be white. Of course, not everyone plays by the rules. Fashion rebels exist even here. Dandies strut with outrageously colored waistcoats. Women pin political slogans beneath their shawls. Street children cobble together outfits from rags and pride. And if you're clever, you'll do the same. Just try not to draw attention. Because appearance here is surveillance. Police, landlords, and passers-by all judge you at a glance. Looking respectable can mean the difference between employment and arrest. Even walking without a hat might mark you as suspicious. And hats, mind you, are expensive. Many people rent them. By the time you're fully dressed, you're already sweating. The corset digs into your ribs. The air tastes like charcoal and cabbage. But you've survived Victorian dressing barely. And now it's time to brave the morning streets and see what's for breakfast. Spoiler, it's probably not something you'll want to eat. You're dressed miraculously, unburnt, marginally laced, and already reconsidering your life choices. But before you brave the filthy streets of Victorian London again, you need to eat. The question is, what counts as breakfast when it's 1852? Your lungs are coated in coal dust, and your belly is still arguing with your boots. First, forget your avocado toast fantasies. The Victorian morning meal is a far cry from anything you'd recognize. For the well-to-do breakfast might include eggs boiled to a gray rubber cold, meats kippers, stale bread marmalade, and enough tea to drown a conscience. It's less about nutrition and more about status. Quantity equals class. But you, dear time traveler, are not dining at Claridge's. You're an accidental commoner now, and commoners eat what they can get. On a good day, you might score a heel of bread and a cup of weak tea. On a bad day, gruel. Yes, real gruel. Thin, lumpy porridge made from oats or barley. Served lukewarm, maybe salted, often suspect. Charles Dickens didn't make it up Victorian workhouses, and low-income families lived off this sludge. You duck into a crowded street-side cookshop, shoulder to shoulder with night shift workers and factory boys. Inside, steam clings to the air, fogging the windows and making everything smell like boiling cabbage. The menu, chalked on a cracked board, offers options like fried liver and bread, sheep's trotters, and the unsettlingly vague meat stew variable. You opt for a boiled egg and toast. It arrives gray and damp, served with a knife so blunt it would struggle to slice memory foam. The tea is lukewarm and tastes like rust, but you eat it all because hunger trumps hesitation. Hygiene. Let's not talk about it. Kitchen standards are flexible. Milk is often watered down butter, sometimes mixed with lard and yellow dye. The bread often bulked up with chalk alum or sawdust. Yes, actual sawdust. Bread adulteration was so rampant that one 1850s reformer described his toast as a product of the carpenter's shop. Still, you're luckier than many. Street urchins beg at the door hoping for leftovers. A match girl warms her fingers over a tin plate. Children chew crusts pulled from rubbish heaps. Malnutrition is endemic. Rickets caused by vitamin D deficiency gives many kids bowed legs. And don't even ask about dental health. Toothpaste, if you can afford it, is often made from brick dust or cuttlefish bone. Speaking of teeth, you decide it's time to clean yours. But there's no sink, no minty foam, and definitely no electric toothbrush. Instead, you might rub a dry cloth over your teeth or use a twig. If you're feeling fancy powdered charcoal, or chalk will do. Some people use salt. Some just chew cloves and hope for the best. There are toothbrushes, technically, but they're made with boar bristles and wooden handles, and they don't reach the places you'd want them to. Oh, and they're communal in many households. That's right, shared toothbrushes. Let that sink in. Historians still argue whether most Victorians actually believed in germ theory or just followed weird personal rituals that accidentally helped. The truth is, understanding of hygiene varied wildly. Some people bathed weekly, others monthly. Soap existed, but it was harsh and lye-heavy. Tooth decay, just part of life. And you'll soon miss your dentist, yes, even the one who talks too much. Still, you've eaten. You've scrubbed your molars with something approximating hygiene. And now it's time to brave the morning outside again. The city's rhythm is picking up carts. Clatter, faster. Bells toll from church spires, and the fog swirls in new patterns as the wind shifts. It's only 9 a.m., and already the streets are alive with purpose and pungency. You step back into the soot-stained light and head for your next ordeal, surviving a short walk without catching a disease or stepping in anything truly regrettable. Victorian London awaits. The door creaks shut behind you with an ominous wheeze, and you step into what might generously be called air. The fog is thicker now, yellowish greasy, and weirdly warm. Locals call it London particular, but it's not particular in a good way. It's what you get when millions of fireplaces belch coal smoke into narrow streets, lined with brick and grime. You cough once, then twice. Get used to it. Welcome to your daily plague walk. Your goal: go maybe 10 blocks without catching cholera, slipping on horse dung, or getting arrested for loitering near a chimney sweep. And yes, those are all plausible outcomes. The first thing you notice is the noise. Carriages rumble past at reckless speed, wheels kicking up dust, and worse, iron-rimmed wheels on cobblestone make a sound like someone shaking skeletons in a metal drum. Vendors shout, bells clang, children scream with the enthusiasm of the unsupervised. A dog runs by with something suspicious in its mouth. You don't look. You sidestep a puddle that smells like fermented cabbage and something unnameable. But it's not water. It's what's known as night soil runoff. A euphemism so polite it could only have been invented by someone wearing a monocle. Basically, it's raw sewage trickling from privies and chamber pots tossed into the street with a hearty Gardes low, watch out for the water. Except no one actually shouts anymore. They just throw. Victorian street cleaning is sporadic at best. Teams of crossing sweepers work the intersections clearing muck in exchange for coins. They're children, or the elderly wielding brooms that look more like tired haystacks. They do what they can, but against the tidal wave of filth, it's hopeless. You quickly learn to step where they step, and never, ever pause near a curb. You pass a woman scrubbing her stoop, with lie muttering to herself in a thick Cockney accent. Behind her, washing lines sag with underclothes stained by London's ever-damp air. Everything is vaguely brownish. You can't tell if it's fog or dirt. Probably both. And then there's the smell. It hits in waves. Coal smoke, fish guts, manure beer, and the ever-present tang of something rotting. Your modern sinuses aren't built for this. You gag. An old man notices and grins, revealing exactly one tooth. Now, the streets aren't just dirty, they're dangerous. Pickpockets abound, working in groups called Fagin gangs, after Dickens' infamous character. A bump from behind might just cost you your handkerchief, or worse, your only coin. You clutch your makeshift wallet and try to blend in, but your boots still squeak with foreignness. Then, there are the bodies. No, not dead ones. Well, not always, but certainly unconscious ones. A man sleeps under a cart, covered in what may be his own coat or someone else's curtain. A child dozes against a lamp post. An old woman rocks back and forth near a gutter, humming to herself. The boundary between sleep and death feels worryingly thin here. And yes, sometimes it is a body. London's mortality rate is high, especially in poorer districts. Corpses are occasionally found in alleys ignored until the smell becomes undeniable. You hurry your pace. Best not to look too long. Historians still argue whether the filth of London directly caused its epidemics or merely exacerbated them. The answer is probably both. Cholera, typhoid, and tuberculosis thrive in this mess. In fact, in 1854, just about now, John Snow. No, not that one is mapping out cholera outbreaks in Soho to prove it's waterborne. But the average person still blames miasmas, bad air, which, to be fair, is understandable. The air is terrible. As you reach a crossroads, you see a cart roll by filled with human waste dustmen, collecting ashes, cinders, and occasionally the byproducts of privy pits. They dump it at the outskirts of town, where it ferments until used as fertilizer. Recycling Victorian style. You've walked half a mile and already your coat smells like smoke and onions. You've learned to hold your breath when passing certain corners. And you've discovered that horse manure is unavoidable. It's estimated London's horses leave 1,000 tons of it per day. Every day. You start to wonder why anyone chooses to live here. But the truth is, people don't really choose, they endure. It's where the work is where survival happens. It's noisy and noxious and nerve-rattling, but it's also alive. This is the center of the empire after all. Everything flows through London: goods, ideas, gossip, and sewage. Your stomach growls. That gray toast wasn't enough. But don't worry, there are plenty of street foods available. Hot pies, often filled with mystery jellied eels, roasted chestnuts, or whelks if you enjoy chewing on ocean-flavored rubber. You pass for now, your appetite still hiding. You duck under a clothesline, avoid a cart loaded with coal, and finally find a patch of dry cobble to catch your breath. You made it, barely. You've made it down the street with your boots mostly clean and your lungs somewhat intact. Congratulations, now it's time to find a job, or at least something vaguely resembling one. Here's the bad news. You can't just upload a resume to LinkedIn or announce your availability on social media. The Victorian labor market doesn't care about your master's degree or your flair for Excel spreadsheets. You've got two choices: manual labor or street hustle, and neither comes with dental insurance. Let's start with the more respectable options, if we can call them that. Factory work is booming. London's industrial machines are hungry for human hands, and they don't particularly care how small those hands are. Textile mills, matchstick factories, and rope works all need bodies. The pay is pitiful, the hours brutal, and the safety standards non-existent. You'll work 12, 16 hours a day, 6 days a week, in dimly lit rooms, thick with dust noise and the occasional scream. Want to keep your fingers? Good luck. For women and children, domestic service is the primary path. You might find work as a scullery maid, chambermaid, or laundry girl if you're lucky. This means backbreaking chores from dawn to dusk, scrubbing floors, boiling sheets, emptying chamber pots, and enduring the constant scorn of your employers. The upside: you usually get a roof over your head and one hot meal a day. The downside: you sleep in the basement and your employer might fire you for sneezing in her presence. Now, if you're not blessed with references, cleanliness, or a high tolerance for abuse, you'll need to get creative. Enter the street trades. Chimney sweep. Sounds romantic in a Mary Poppins way, until you realize most sweeps are children, forced to crawl up flues barely wide enough for a cat. They emerge coughing soot and blood, often developing soot wart, a form of chimney-related cancer. It's one of the first occupational cancers in history, so maybe skip that one. How about rat catching? London is crawling with rodents, and enterprising souls make a living catching them for sport pest control, or to sell to rat-baiting pits where dogs compete to see who can kill the most rats in a minute. All very quaint. You'll need a bag of stick and the ability to ignore the sound of squeaking. Then there's mudlarking, combing the banks of the Thames at low tide for scraps, coins, metal bones, or anything vaguely sellable. The river is toxic sludge. The work is dangerous, and the pay is a few pennies. But hey, you're technically self-employed. Or maybe you'll try selling things, anything. Matches, newspapers, flowers, shoelaces. You join the army of street sellers shouting themselves hoarse to earn half a shilling. Competition is fierce, and police don't appreciate loitering. Still, it's flexible work. Of course, there's also the criminal option: pickpocketing, swindling, smuggling. But let's try not to go full Oliver Twist just yet. The prisons are grim, the workhouses grimmer. And if you're caught stealing a handkerchief, You could end up on a ship to Australia. Historians debate whether Victorian labor was exploitative or simply the natural cost of industrialization. Either way, it's your new reality. There's no social safety net, no labor unions yet, and no minimum wage. You work to live barely. But don't give up. If you can land a stable position, show up sober, and somehow avoid typhoid, you just might get promoted from mudlark to shop assistant. And that's basically a promotion to nobility by 1850s standards. Now dust yourself off again, tighten your boots, and let's see if you can find a place to sleep tonight. Spoiler, it's not going to be comfortable. So you've made it through another coal-scented, blister-footed Victorian day. You're covered in grime. Your pockets contain exactly one halfpenny and a boiled sweet from a street urchin. You're not eating that, and your back feels like it's been stepped on by an industrial loom. It's time to rest. But where? Unless you're flush with cash or exceptionally charming, you're not checking into the Savoy. In fact, the very concept of privacy is about to feel like a forgotten dream. Let's break down your options. Option 1. The common lodging house. These are packed, poorly ventilated boarding rooms where dozens of people, men, women, children, sleep side by side on straw-stuffed mattresses if you're lucky, or bare floorboards if you're not. You'll pay by the night in cash often to a landlady who shouts more than she speaks and whose rules are entirely arbitrary. Want to sleep upright on a bench with a rope slung across your chest so you don't topple over? That's a rope room. Yes, that was a real thing. You pay for the privilege of not falling directly to the floor. The rope gets cut at sunrise and you slump down like laundry in a thunderstorm. Don't have even that much money. You might find a 4-penny coffin, a wooden box, just large enough to curl up in, offered by charities or desperate lodging houses. It's better than the street, though. Just barely. And then there's the streets themselves. In warmer months, people sleep under bridges, in alleys, or on church steps. Some wrap themselves in newspapers. Others share barrels or carts. Every shadowed nook of London has its resident sleepers. In winter, many simply don't wake up. Now, let's say you've scraped together enough to stay in a decent common house. Don't relax yet. The mattress is probably crawling with bed bugs. The person next to you smells like pickled onions and despair, and the room reeks of damp socks and broken dreams. Privacy is non-existent. Eavesdropping is inevitable. You'll hear snoring, muttering, occasional weeping, and possibly a small fight over a crust of bread. And heaven help you if you're a woman alone. Unaccompanied women are often turned away, or worse, assumed to be sex workers. Many are. For some, it's the only way to afford rent. Brothels exist in every district, though some disguise themselves as boarding houses with suspiciously well-dressed landlords and an unusually high turnover of residents. Still, the lodging house is your best bet. If you can find one that hasn't already filled up for the night, pay your pennies, keep your boots close, and pray no one robs you while you sleep, or coughs directly into your eyeballs. Historians note that by the mid-1800s, London was experiencing an unprecedented housing crisis. With its population exploding, the city simply couldn't house its people. Developers built cheap tenements as fast as possible, narrow, damp, and often collapsing within decades. Whole families shared a single room. 10 people to a bed was not unusual. Some buildings didn't have toilets, just buckets, passed from floor to floor. You think of your 21st century mattress, your heating, your bathroom. Even your floor would feel like paradise now. But you're here, stuck hungry, itchy, and exhausted. So you lie down on a straw pallet next to three strangers and one very bold rat. The walls creak, the roof leaks. Someone starts singing an off-key lullaby in the dark. And somehow, sleep comes anyway. Because tomorrow, you have to do it all again. The sun hasn't risen yet, but the city is already groaning to life. You blink awake beneath a moth-eaten blanket in a room packed with human breathing and regret. Someone is snoring. Someone else is mumbling about bread. And the floorboards creak under the boots of an early riser. You survived the night. Now comes your next critical survival skill in Victorian London, learning the rules of manners. Because here, etiquette isn't just a sign of civility, it's a line between belonging and suspicion. Between one of us and get him officer. Let's begin with the basics. First, posture. Straight back hands visible, no slouching, unless you're a chimney sweep or a poet with consumption. Men tip their hats always, and women lower their eyes demurely when passing someone above their station. Don't stare. Don't shout. And for heaven's sake, don't point. That's for the desperate and the French. Speaking of hats, wear one. Always. A bare head signals poverty or madness, and neither gets you a warm welcome. The variety doesn't matter much, stovepipe bowler bonnet, but the act of removing it in greeting is critical. Failure to do so might earn you a swift reprimand or a thrown cabbage, or both. Next speech. Do not swear, even mildly, even in jest. Victorian society loves propriety more than air, and your 21st century vocabulary will land you in trouble fast. Instead of, "What the hell was that?" try, "Gracious, what an alarming development." Instead of, "I'm starving," say, "I should like a light refreshment," if it's no trouble. Your vowels matter. A dropped H can label you lowborn. Say, "house not ouse." Say, "terribly good" instead of "cool." And never interrupt someone above your class. Actually, never interrupt anyone. Just nod politely and say, "Indeed." Now greetings. For men, a nod or hat tip to strangers, a formal bow to acquaintances, and a handshake only if initiated by the higher status individual. For women, a slight curtsy and no physical contact ever unless offered a gloved hand first. Failure to observe this may lead to scandal, or at the very least social exile, which in Victorian terms means no one will sell you jam. There are rules for everything: when to speak, when to sit, how to sip tea without slurping or clanking. Even eye contact is loaded. Too much, and you're brazen. Too little, and you're shifty. Just the right amount says, "I belong. I know the rules. Please don't arrest me." Let's talk about class. If you're dressed like a laborer, don't even think about entering a gentleman's club or respectable tea room. You'll be stopped before your boot crosses the threshold. But if you've somehow managed to dress neatly and keep your accent in check, you might pass as lower middle class. This grants access to markets, church halls, and the occasional polite nod from a constable. But it's not just about looking respectable, it's about acting like you belong. Don't run. Don't whistle. Don't sing in public unless you're being paid for it or you're drunk enough that the police won't bother. Don't touch anything that doesn't belong to you, even by accident. And if someone drops a coin, don't pounce. Let them retrieve it. Greed is unseemly. And if you're unsure, follow the lead of the person with the cleanest boots. That's usually the safest bet. Historians argue over whether these social codes serve to civilize or control. In truth, it was both. Victorian manners were tools of both aspiration and oppression. They gave structure, but also kept people in their place. For you, the outsider, it's a minefield. But here's the secret. You don't have to be perfect. Just close enough. Tip your hat. Mind your tongue. Don't pick your teeth in public. And maybe, just maybe, you'll make it to lunch without getting smacked by an umbrella. Tomorrow, we'll tackle the laws you didn't know existed and how not to get thrown in jail for being slightly weird. You've straightened your coat, adjusted your hat, and practiced your polite nod in the reflection of a shop window. You're starting to blend in, or at least not look like someone who fell through time. But don't get too comfortable. Victorian London has laws, lots of them, and some are so strange and specific you could end up fined, jailed, or worse for doing something as innocent as, say, carrying suspicious bread. Yes, really. Let's start with appearances. Looking odd or idle is enough to raise suspicion. There's no official law against being out of place. But the police nicknamed bobbies or peelers are more than happy to use the Vagrancy Act of 1824 to remove you from polite society. If you're found wandering without visible means of employment or simply sitting too long in one spot, you might be arrested for loitering with intent. Intent to do what doesn't matter. You look weird. That's enough. Whistling on a Sunday. Don't do it. Singing, playing music, or generally enjoying yourself in public on the Sabbath is frowned upon. Blue laws mean that Sunday should be reserved for solemn prayer, long church sermons, and uncomfortable trousers. Even street performers go silent, and shops lock their doors. You whistle a jaunty tune. Congratulations, you're now a public nuisance. And then there's bread. Adulterated food is everywhere, and laws about it are a mess. If you're caught selling or even carrying bread that's been laced with chalk alum or powdered bones, you might be accused of fraud. Of course, if you're just a buyer, that doesn't save you. No one cares about your intent. It's about optics. Carrying mysterious loaves could get you fined or hauled before a magistrate. Just point at someone else and pretend you were delivering it. Now let's say you're thirsty. You duck into a public house for a pint. Be careful how quickly you drink it. Drunkenness is a finable offense, and if you stagger, shout, or even sing too loudly, you could be tossed in jail. Worse still, if you're under 16 and found inside a pub at all, you risk legal trouble and a swift scolding by someone in a bowler hat. Even your shopping habits aren't safe. Hawkers and street vendors must have licenses. If you try to sell anything, even matches or flowers without one, you can be arrested on the spot. And selling includes shouting about your wares too loudly, blocking the pavement, or being disliked by the local constable. And don't even think about bathing in the Thames. First of all, it's a bubbling soup of death. Second, it's technically illegal. Public nudity, even accidental, is scandalous. This includes showing an ankle, or laughing too loudly, or expressing opinions about women's rights in mixed company. Yes, even opinions can be criminal. Freedom of speech exists, sort of. But if you say anything deemed seditious against the monarchy, the Church of England, or the Empire, you might find yourself invited for questioning. This includes political pamphleteering, organizing protests, or criticizing the price of meat too loudly. Keep it to yourself, or whisper it in the back of a gin shop. Historians often point out that Victorian laws were less about fairness and more about control. They regulated behavior movement and morality, all while maintaining the illusion of order. For the poor and the foreign, which includes you time traveler, justice is a coin toss, and you're holding the wrong currency. So what can you do? Keep moving. Look like you belong. Don't whistle. Don't smile at strangers. Don't run unless something is actually on fire. Speak softly. Carry nothing suspicious. And if a constable approaches you, tip your hat, lower your gaze, and pretend you have somewhere very important to be. It's exhausting. But if you survive the legal labyrinth, you just might earn yourself a quiet afternoon and a bite to eat. Speaking of which, it's time to find lunch that doesn't contain sawdust. You've survived the morning more or less. You haven't been arrested for loitering. Your ankles remain modestly covered, and you managed not to offend anyone with your accent yet. But now, your stomach growls like a factory boiler, and it's time for a bite to eat. But before you go chasing a fresh sandwich or a cup of coffee, a warning: Victorian food isn't just unpleasant, it can kill you. Let's start with water. You're thirsty, right? Bad news: do not drink the tap water. In fact, avoid it entirely. London's drinking water in the mid-1800s is drawn straight from the Thames. Yes, that same river where people dump waste animal carcasses and the occasional body. It's essentially disease broth. Cholera thrives here, as do typhoid and dysentery. If you're lucky, you'll just get the runs. If you're not well, Jon Snow again. Not the one from Westeros will be mapping your house in his cholera outbreak chart by sundown. So what do people drink? Beer, ale, gin, anything but water. Even children sip small beer, a low-alcohol brew that's safer than the city's water supply. Tea is also a safe option if you can afford the boiling water and sugar. If someone offers you plain water, they either like you very much or they want you dead. Now, to the food. Bread is a staple, but it's not just flour and yeast. Bakers often cut their dough with chalk ground bone or plaster of Paris to bulk it up. It looks fine until you chip a tooth or develop some very Victorian stomach issues. The same goes for milk, which might be thinned with water from a questionable pump or colored with yellow pigment to appear fresh. Bon appetit. If you're short on coin, street food is your friend and your nemesis. Vendors crowd the alleyways with portable kitchens, hawking everything from hot pies to roasted chestnuts to fried fish. The pies may be filled with mystery meat. Think pigeon rat or yesterday's leftovers, and the fish was likely pulled from the same river that doubles as a public toilet. But it's warm and filling, and for a few pennies, it might keep you standing another few hours. One popular snack: jellied eels, chopped, boiled, and suspended in a clear, gelatinous goo. It's an acquired taste, and by acquired, we mean probably never. Then there are Welk's chewy sea snails served cold with vinegar. You'll see old ladies slurping them from bowls like Victorian oysters. They taste like ocean rubber bands and smell even worse. Not feeling that adventurous, maybe try a sausage roll. But be warned, many were nicknamed mystery tubes because the meat inside was often horse dog or entirely theoretical. If you're feeling fancy and can spend a shilling or two, head to a chop house, an early version of a pub diner hybrid. There you might find a proper plate of food: mutton chops, kidney pudding, boiled potatoes, or spotted dick. A steamed suet dessert with currants. It's heavy, greasy, and mostly safe if it's fresh. If it's not, well, you'll know soon enough. Historians estimate that food adulteration reached scandalous levels by the mid-19th century. Entire books were written exposing the horrors, like The Chemistry of Common Life, or A Treatise on Food and Its Adulterations. Parliament eventually passed laws to address it, but for now, you're on your own. Tips to survive lunch. If it smells off, don't eat it. If it's too cheap to be true, assume it's made of lies. Stick to food you can identify, and if it jiggles and it's not supposed to walk away. You manage to find a hot potato wrapped in a scrap of newspaper from a vendor with the kindest scowl you've seen all day. It's dry, starchy, and vaguely warm. You devour it anyway. Your stomach thanks you, then quietly wonders if you've made a mistake. Still, you've eaten. You're upright. You're alive. And now, maybe you're brave enough to stroll down to the riverside. The mighty Thames awaits, and not in a good way. Your lunch, if that's what we're calling it, has settled uneasily in your stomach, and the fog has thinned just enough for a stroll. Or maybe you've just become nose blind to the city's bouquet of smoke-damp wool and eel jelly. Either way, you head toward the water. After all, what better way to see London's heart than to stand beside its great river, the Thames? In your time, it might be a backdrop for postcards, joggers, and boat tours. But here, in the mid-1800s, the Thames is not a river. Not really. It's more like a moving cesspool, a wide flowing trough of industrial waste, human excrement, dead animals, chemical runoff, and half-rotted things you're better off not identifying. Its surface is often described as black, oily, and shimmering with colors that should not exist in nature. They call it the Great Stink, and that's not poetic exaggeration. In 1858, the stench from the river became so unbearable that Parliament had to stop holding sessions. Yes, literal lawmakers fled the building clutching scented handkerchiefs to their faces, while desperate workers tried hanging curtains soaked in chloride of lime, an early disinfectant, over the windows. It didn't help. Nothing helped. But for now, it's just you, the river, and the sharp reek of centuries of poor planning. You spot a few boats' lightermen hauling cargo ferrymen shouting prices, children scampering across wobbly gangplanks. Someone's fishing. But you can't imagine eating anything that comes out of this sludge. And yet people do. Fish, mostly eels, still live in the Thames. Somehow. And where there's life, there's commerce. If you ever wondered how jellied eels became a London staple, this is where it begins. On the embankment, a group of mudlarks comb the shallows, trousers rolled to the knee, boots caked in black sludge. They search for anything: coins, tools, bits of rope, scraps of copper. They're mostly children, and their hands are raw from the cold. One finds something and cheers. It's unclear if it's treasure or trash. Likely both. Nearby, a woman empties a chamber pot directly into the river. She barely glances at you as she wipes her hands and heads back up a narrow lane. Behind her, a man uses the riverbank as a toilet. That's just how it goes. But don't think the Victorians don't care. They do, sort of. Public health reformers are already shouting for change. Engineers like Joseph Bezalgette are working on sewer systems to reroute the city's waste underground. But it's not finished yet. Right now, the Thames is the city's lifeblood and its latrine. And everyone knows it. You turn away your eyes, watering your stomach, reconsidering that hot potato. Even in the cold, the air by the river is heavy and cloying. You've had enough. But before you go, one last curiosity. Across the water, down a crooked alley, you spot a wooden sign swinging in the wind. It reads, Thames Water Company. Ironically, they sell bottled water. From the river, filtered supposedly. It's one of London's finest scams. Historians agree the Thames in the 1800s was both a symbol and a catastrophe. It powered trade-fed industry and reflected the cost of unchecked growth. It was London's artery and its warning. You back away slowly, boots squelching on the damp stones. One last glance, and then you turn toward dry ground, fresher air, and hopefully some fun. Next up, you've earned a little entertainment. Maybe a freak show, maybe a seance, maybe both. Let's see what Victorians do for fun when they're not surviving. You've washed your hands twice and wiped your boots on something vaguely mossy. After surviving the Thames, you deserve a reward. Not a hot bath. Good luck finding one, but at least a few hours of Victorian entertainment. So what do people do for fun in the soot-streaked heart of the empire? Let's begin with the most obvious, the freak show. These aren't sideshows tucked behind the curtain. They're center stage attractions woven into the fabric of everyday life. Institutions like the Egyptian Hall and the Royal Surrey Zoological Gardens host elaborate spectacles of the extraordinary. Inside, you might find bearded ladies, sword swallowers, tattooed savages, and people with medical conditions now understood as genetic disorders, but then billed as marvels of nature. The audience oohs and gasps, munching roasted chestnuts and gossiping loudly. For Victorians, curiosity is currency. The weirder, the better. A man with 3 legs, front row, a woman who claims to eat coal and breathe fire. Here's your 6pence, madam. It's exploitative, yes, but also weirdly universal. The curiosity, the discomfort, the way people look for their own reflections in what's different. And message, if you've got any lingering modern guilt, don't worry. Many of these performers are in control of their acts, earning more than factory workers and often building cult followings. Still, if that's too much for your delicate, time-traveling soul, you could try the theater. London stages are packed. Shakespeare revivals, Gilbert and Sullivan operettas, dramatic readings, and bawdy comedies with titles like A Kiss in the Coal Shed and The Barber's Blunder. The working class flocks to music halls, rowdy venues filled with beer, laughter, and suggestive songs. It's loud, crude, and wildly popular. Think stand-up comedy meets Victorian karaoke minus any sense of moderation. Want something quieter? Try a seance. Spiritualism is booming. The Victorians are obsessed with ghosts, mediums, and the great beyond. Death is ever present, thanks to diseased childbirth and chimney-related accidents, so speaking with the dead feels less creepy and more like keeping in touch. You might attend a private seance in a dark parlor, holding hands with strangers as a medium hums moans and maybe levitates a hat. Or you might catch a public demonstration. A woman in black, summoning ghostly voices slates, scribbling with chalk, a tambourine floating overhead. Is it real? Almost definitely not. But it's gripping, and you might find comfort in pretending. Prefer something outdoors. Hyde Park is your friend. On Sundays, it's full of strollers and soapbox speakers, some preaching religion, others advocating revolution. You could listen to a firebrand rant about the evils of steam power or the coming robot apocalypse. Okay, maybe not that one. Or you could just rent a boat and float in the Serpentine, assuming you don't mind the occasional eel bumping your oar. Or maybe you're more of a thrill seeker. Then, head to the Battersea Pleasure Gardens or Cremorne Gardens. There you'll find balloon rides, fireworks acrobats, and dances that grow progressively wilder as the night deepens and the gin flows. Just keep your pockets close and your morals closer. Historians say Victorian entertainment walked a razor's edge, balancing propriety with perversion, education with escapism, and they're right. Behind the stiff collars and lace gloves lies a culture obsessed with sensation. They want to feel something, anything, that isn't cold or coal-dusted. So you join the crowd. You cheer for the dancing bear. You gasp at the illusionist's disappearing act. You even hum along to a bawdy song about a sailor and a barmaid and an unusually slippery fish. And for a moment, you forget the smog, the stink, and the looming threat of typhus. You're just a person laughing in a crowd halfway through a borrowed life. But it's getting late, and tomorrow may require a doctor. Let's hope you don't need one. Because Victorian medicine, that's a whole new nightmare. Morning again. You awake on your straw pallet or rope swing or barrel nook depending on your budget last night, and something's off. Maybe it's the scratch in your throat, or the pounding behind your eyes, or the vague suspicion that your left molar is staging a mutiny. Whatever it is, you might need a doctor. And in Victorian London, that's a terrifying prospect. Let's start with the basics. Medicine in the 1850s is a strange blend of ancient theory emerging science and aggressive guesswork. Germ theory. Not quite yet. Most physicians still believe illness is caused by miasmas, bad air, or imbalances in your bodily humors. Blood phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. You apparently have too much of something, or not enough, or your spleen is out of sorts. Diagnosis is often accompanied by a raised eyebrow and a Latin phrase that sounds impressive and means absolutely nothing. Your options for care vary wildly depending on class. If you're rich, congratulations, you can summon a doctor to your home. He'll arrive in a frock coat with a gold-headed cane, take your pulse for a full 5 minutes, and announce that you need rest beef tea and possibly a leech or two. You'll be encouraged to avoid strong emotions, read the Bible, and not walk barefoot on cold floors. If you're poor, and let's face it, you are, you'll head to a charity hospital or dispensary. St. Thomas's Guys, or maybe the Royal Free. These places are overcrowded, underfunded, and smell like carbolic acid and fear. You'll wait for hours crammed into a wooden hallway beside coughing chimney sweeps and pale women holding their bellies. Eventually, a medical student with one term under his belt will see you. He might prod your abdomen, peer into your mouth with a candle, and then declare your condition most interesting. He means it. Because in the Victorian era, hospitals aren't just for healing, they're for learning. Every patient is a case study. If you're unlucky, your visit might be observed by a half dozen students taking notes while you try not to faint. And the treatments, buckle up. Bloodletting is still common. Cutting open a vein or using leeches to draw out the illness. Or you might be prescribed a tonic, usually a terrifying mix of alcohol, opium, mercury, or turpentine. Feeling better already? You shouldn't. Have a toothache. Time for the barber surgeon. No anesthesia. Just a pair of pliers, a shot of gin, and someone to hold you down. The success rate depends on your threshold for screaming. Surgery exists, but it's a gamble. Anesthesia is just beginning to appear in the form of ether or chloroform, but many doctors don't trust it yet. Besides, antiseptic procedures haven't been widely adopted. Your surgeon might sharpen his scalpel on his apron, wipe his hands on your sheets, and go elbow deep without gloves. Mortality rates are horrifying. Need childbirth? Good luck. Maternal death is common. Midwives and doctors don't always wash hands between patients. Germ theory, again, is not yet gospel. And if you develop childbed fever, it's almost certainly fatal. Still, you might luck out. Some physicians like Florence Nightingale, and soon Joseph Lister, are advocating for hygiene and better conditions. A few hospitals are beginning to clean instruments and ventilate wards. But it's the exception, not the rule. Historians agree that this era is a turning point. Victorian medicine is on the cusp of modernity, but for now, it's a swamp of superstition, well-meaning guesses, and painful lessons. If you survive a visit to the doctor, you'll likely come out with fewer teeth, a limp, and an interesting rash, but alive. So you decide to tough it out. You wrap up warm sip some tea, if you can find any, and hope the fever passes. You're already carrying enough soot in your lungs to fuel a small fireplace. What's one more ailment night is falling again. You ache in places you didn't know existed, but you're still breathing. Tomorrow, you'll rest. At least as much as anyone can in a room full of snoring strangers and a dog that won't stop licking its paws. Until then, curl up under your coat. Don't cough too loudly, and pray no one brings leeches. It's night again in Victorian London, though night is a generous word. You'd expect darkness, perhaps quiet a peaceful moment to recover from the day. But here, night has its own rhythm, its own palette of smoke flickering gaslight, and shadows that move a little too deliberately. Back at your lodging house, or whatever passed for one tonight, you settle into your corner. It's cold. You tuck your hands beneath your coat and try not to breathe too deeply. The air is thick with coal dust and the lingering aroma of someone's feet. The floor creaks with every movement. Outside, a distant bell tolls the hour. 11. In the absence of electricity, the city dims early. Gas lamps hiss and flicker along the main roads, casting amber halos through the fog. But off the boulevards, London goes dark. Really dark. Alleys become pitch-black tunnels. Windows glow faintly with candlelight. The silence is never total. Horses clop by dogs bark, drunken voices drift from the public house down the block. If you're lucky enough to be middle class, unlikely, but let's pretend you might enjoy a proper bedtime routine. A basin of water for washing. A bed with feather-stuffed mattress and quilts, maybe even a chamber pot that isn't already half full. But for the poor, and that's where you, bed down in your clothes, coat collar, pulled up shoes wrapped in rags so no one steals them while you sleep. If you're in a common lodging house, you share space with half a dozen strangers and all their snores, groans, and murmured dreams. There are no earplugs. There is no privacy. You curl toward the wall and pretend you can't feel the bugs. Still, bedtime rituals persist. A mother hums a lullaby to a child. A man sharpens a blade for work you hope. Someone prays aloud in a language you don't understand, and somewhere a rat makes the boldest move of its evening and scurries across a sleeping man's chest. He doesn't stir. You begin to nod off, soothed by exhaustion more than comfort. But there's a knock at the door, then another. A voice mumbles something urgent. A cough, a sharp, wet one, cuts through the dark like a warning. Tuberculosis is everywhere. You pull your coat tighter. Still sleep comes. It has to. You dream in fragments, chimney flues, twisted alleyways, a fog that seeps through your bones. Somewhere in the dream, a carriage rolls by, with golden wheels drawn by a team of skeletal horses. Queen Victoria waves. She's frowning. A crash wakes you. Someone knocked over a basin. Swearing follows, then laughter, then silence again. You lie still. Your back hurts. Your head is damp, but you're still alive. Historians often say that Victorian nights were where the masks slipped. The bustle of the day fell away, and the reality of hardship, hope, and human noise came clearer in the dark. There were no lights to soften the truth, just you and the city's breathing. Eventually, the first glimmer of morning eeks in gray and reluctant. Another day begins, but you made it, for now. Dawn bleeds slowly through the soot-stained windows of London, painting the city in hues of ash and pewter. The gas lamps flicker out one by one, surrendering to the weak daylight. Roosters crow, somewhere far off, probably next to a tannery, and the city groans awake its breath, already thick with coal smoke and damp. You stir. Your back is stiff, your feet are cold, and your dreams were more unsettling than restful. But the room is full of life again. Someone coughs. A baby cries. A fight breaks out over a crust of bread, ending with a muttered apology and shared crumbs. It's morning in Victorian London, and no one greets it gracefully. There's no concept of sleeping in here, not unless you're dead or criminally idle. Most workers rise before the sun, slipping out into the gray to reach factories, markets, or workshops by 6. You rise with them, or risk being left behind in the ever-churning wheel of the city. There's no alarm clock. The rhythm of life here is dictated by church bells, shouting match sellers, and the clatter of milk carts. You wash your face in a cracked basin with water that smells vaguely of tin. There's no soap, just a sliver of something slippery and gray. You dry your hands on your coat and try not to gag as someone uses the chamber pot nearby. Breakfast is optional. Many skip it. You might chew a crust of yesterday's bread if you're lucky, or sip lukewarm tea from a chipped mug passed around like communion. It's not enough. It's never enough. You check your belongings. Still there, miraculously. One coin, a button, that suspicious boiled sweet, and the hope that today might be marginally less grim than yesterday. Stepping outside the city blinks under the morning light. The fog has lifted slightly, revealing grime-streaked windows and rows of chimneys puffing like angry kettles. The streets are already alive. Butchers opening shutters, boys running with newspapers, chimney sweeps setting off with sooty grins and ropes over their shoulders. You join the tide, walking briskly, trying to look like you belong. Because that's half the battle pretending this life is yours. Maybe you'll find work today. Maybe you won't. Maybe you'll earn enough for a hot meal and a better bed. Or maybe you'll get caught in a downpour and spend the night coughing under a bridge. Either way, you move. Because movement is survival. Historians often marvel at the resilience of people who lived through this era, how they endured, adapted, and even found joy in the soot and struggle. And here you are, one more body in the crowd, one more ghost passing through time and cobblestones. The city doesn't notice you. It never does. But you notice it. You've seen its slums and its spectacles, its poisons and its peculiarities. You've walked its gaslit veins and stood on the edge of its rotting river. And now, as another day begins, you do what every Londoner does. You get on with it. Because survival isn't glamorous. It's getting up when you're cold, walking when you're sore, smiling when you're hungry. It's enduring and hoping and trying again. And you're still here. You blink awake as another morning fog rolls in, curling through the windows like a quiet warning. It's barely light out, and already the sounds of the city are gathering hoofbeats on stone, shouting vendors, the clatter of a milk cart on crooked wheels. You're sore, you're hungry, and your throat still scratches from last night's smoke. But you're alive. That's no small thing. You've survived your first full day in Victorian London. You dodged the Thames' toxic breath, danced around cholera, infected puddles, outmaneuvered the Vagrancy Act, and even managed to eat without being poisoned by chalk bread or questionable eel jelly. You learned to tip your hat watch, your vowels, and avoid anything that glows unnaturally in the dark. You're learning the rhythm now, how the city pulses under the soot and ceremony, how its heartbeat thumps, not in the palace, but in the alleyways and markets and crowded tenement rooms. It's a brutal place, but not without wonder. You've watched a seance, survived a freak show, and endured Victorian medicine without losing a limb. You've seen hope in a child selling flowers with dirty hands, and joy in a music hall packed with laughter and gin. You've glimpsed the empire not as a page in a history book, but as something alive, complicated, exhausting, and very real. So will you make it to the end of the week? That depends on your luck, on your cleverness, on whether you can avoid typhoid, get paid tomorrow, and find a place to sleep that doesn't involve a rope stretched across a bench, on whether you can remember to call trousers, trousers, and not pants, which means underwear here, and causes great embarrassment. But you've made it this far, and that's enough. For now, the city accepts you, not warmly, not gently, but it hasn't swallowed you whole. And in Victorian London, that's a win. You tie your boots, shrug on your coat, and step out into the gray again. The fog curls around your collar like a curious ghost. It's time to do it all over again. And with that, welcome to 1850s London. Survive well. You've just landed in the 1870s with nothing but your bewildered expression and whatever you're wearing, which tragically does not blend in. You're instantly struck by the cold bite of the Thames wind, the heavy reek of horse manure, and something tangy, maybe cabbage, maybe despair. A soot-stained child stares at you as if you're made of unicorn horn. Chimneys cough black smoke into a yellow-gray sky. Cobblestones clatter with hooves and iron wheels, and every few paces there's someone shouting, selling matches, fish heads, maybe just yelling for fun. You don't know. A man with an unsettling mustache brushes past you, muttering about miasma. Welcome to Victorian London, a city brimming with elegance disease and about 800 different ways to die before breakfast. You're going to need to learn fast, or the soup alone might finish you. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You blink through the fog, which is less mystical mist and more chemical accident, and try to get your bearings. The streets are a maze, and nothing makes sense. The signs are painted in fonts you associate with pirate-themed escape rooms. You pass a butcher whose meat is entirely unrefrigerated and possibly singing. There's a puddle that reflects no light. Don't step in that. Women in towering hats clatter past you, eyes front unsmiling. A boy in short trousers offers to shine your shoes, which are modern sneakers, so you just shake your head and feel 200% more foreign than you already did. He mutters something in thick Cockney. You're 75% sure it was a curse. You smell roasted chestnuts and something suspiciously like hot iron. Somewhere nearby, a church bell tolls the hour, but nobody reacts. You're not dead yet, but it's early. Historians still argue whether Victorian London's signature smell was more sewer than smoke, but either way, it's in your nose now. The city's air was a toxic cocktail of coal emissions, gaslight residue, and whatever was fermenting in the Thames. People blamed the miasma for disease, not the germs, which were still a fringe theory at this point. You squint up. The sky is the color of dishwater, and it's barely noon. You're hungry, tired, and already regretting your time travel choices. But you're here. You're committed, and you're not going home until you've at least tried to survive a day in this grimy wonderland. A shrill whistle pierces the air. Maybe a constable, maybe a factory foreman, maybe someone boiling eels. You have no idea. You cross the street cautiously, dodging an ox cart and stepping over something suspiciously squishy. You don't know it yet, but the most dangerous decision you'll make today is about lunch. You're cold, confused, and craving something hot. And there it is, a curl of steam rising from a dented cart beside a pub. The vendor is a stout woman in a shawl that could double as a curtain, stirring a pot of what might generously be called stew. She grins, revealing exactly one tooth, and waves you over. "Fourpence," she says, tapping the side of the cart with a ladle that's seen better decades. You peek into the pot and see a grayish slurry bobbing with unidentifiable lumps. Some of it may be meat. Some of it is definitely potato. Most of it is suspicious. Your stomach grumbles. You reach for a coin, but hesitate. What's in this stuff? Victorians weren't known for food safety. In fact, if there were a prize for century most likely to accidentally poison its own citizens with soup, the 1800s would have walked away with gold. Historians still argue whether food adulteration or pure apathy was the greater killer. That stew. It might include sawdust for bulk alum to whiten the flour, and a dash of copper sulfate for that appetizing green pea color. Oh yes, Victorian chefs were basically warlocks. But you're hungry and the vendor is still staring. A grizzled man beside you is already slurping his portion with a look of deep resignation. You hand over the coin, take the bowl, and try not to think about how long the liquid's been bubbling. The first sip is surprising. Not good, but not immediately lethal. You taste beef maybe, parsnip possibly, burnt boot leather. Definitely. There's a chalky texture that doesn't belong in food. Victorian London had no centralized food safety oversight. Vendors often reuse the same pot day after day, topping it off with whatever meat scraps and vegetables they could scrounge. Historians still debate whether some of these street stews ever fully cooled down, just a continuous simmer for months, maybe years. You chew something chewy. You don't want to know what it is. Nearby, two boys argue over who gets to lick the inside of a meat pie wrapper. The taller one threatens to push the other into the gutter, which is alarmingly close to the stew cart. Nobody blinks. A rat dashes by. You eat more slowly now. The woman ladles another helping into someone's tin cup, barely glancing at the contents. There's a chunk of something floating in it that looks distressingly tooth-like. No one comments. Soup in this era is a gamble. Rich Londoners dined on clear broths and dainty consommes. The working class. They got whatever came cheapest, often recycled bones, rotting vegetables, and offal that should have been buried, not boiled. By the mid-1800s, government reforms began to address rampant food fraud. The 1860 Food Adulteration Act was a start, but enforcement was weak, and most street food remained as trustworthy as a dishonest barber with an open razor. You finish your bowl because hunger wins. Your stomach feels uncertain, like it's waiting for your brain to explain what just happened. You may survive this meal, but it's far from guaranteed. A lady walks past, holding a parasol and a tightly leashed child. She wrinkles her nose at your dining situation, though you notice she's holding a handkerchief to her mouth. Not for decorum, probably to block the stench. The air's gotten thicker since you arrived. Remember, even if the soup doesn't kill you, the water used to make it might. You've survived the soup technically, and now you need a place to sleep. You can already feel the fatigue setting in like a wool blanket soaked in coal dust. But you don't know where to go. And Victorian London is not a city that rewards indecision after sunset. Options. Oh, there are plenty, none of them good. You consider a lodging house, a place where the poor of London could for a few pennies rent a spot, in a room so overcrowded it violates modern fire codes by existing. Inside, the air is thick with sweat mildew and the kind of smells that cling to your soul. 50 people, one chamber pot. You'll sleep shoulder to shoulder with snoring strangers and the occasional rat with opinions. Or there's the penny sit-up. Picture this: a row of benches, each with a rope stretched chest height across it. You pay 1 penny to sit there through the night, slumped forward, held vaguely upright by the rope. No lying down, no backrests, and no dignity. At dawn, the rope is cut, and everyone slumps onto the filthy floor. Morning has come. It's not even the cheapest option. If you're truly desperate, you can try the workhouse. But be warned, once inside, you may not be allowed out without a full dose of humiliation and hard labor. And good luck pretending to be destitute in your suspiciously modern shoes. Historians still argue whether the coffin beds of the era, tiny wooden boxes with lids rented by the night, were a practical sleep solution or a morbid metaphor. You shuffle past a row of dim doorways, reading the signs nailed to the bricks. Respectable rooms, no children, good beds, 3D per night, quiet tenants only. You knock at one, and a face peeks out through a small slit, eyes narrowed. You don't smell like gin, they mutter, then slam the door. Apparently, that was a compliment. Eventually, you find a DOS house with enough room to squeeze in. Inside, it's a long, low-ceilinged hall, filled with hay-stuffed mattresses and bodies already curled up in piles. A woman argues quietly with a man about who stole whose boots. Someone is gently humming Greensleeves. The whole room smells like wet wool and despair. You hand over your coins and claim a spot. The mattress is more sack than support. Your neighbor coughs in Morse code. Something scurries across your ankle. You tell yourself it was just imagination, but it was definitely whiskered. People slept like this every night. Victorian London's housing shortage was legendary. The population exploded during the Industrial Revolution, but affordable housing didn't keep pace. Landlords turned every possible space into tenements, basements, attics, even old stables. Families of 6 lived in single rooms with neighbors inches away and sanitation a far-off dream. You lie down slowly, breathing shallowly through your scarf. Above you, someone is whispering prayers. Below someone is snoring like a saw hitting gravel. You close your eyes and pretend it's cozy. A child somewhere giggles, then coughs for a full minute. You may not get restful sleep tonight, but you've got 4 walls, a roof, and fewer visible rats than expected. By 1870s standards, that's a win. Morning arrives not with sunlight, but with shouting. You're jostled awake by a fight over an old sock. Someone's arguing about who snored the loudest. A man with no shoes is trying to sell spoons he may or may not have carved himself. Your back aches from sleeping on a mattress that seems to have been stuffed with regrets and potato peels. But you're alive. Time to move. Navigating Victorian London requires more than a good sense of direction. It requires street smarts, decent boots, and a healthy distrust of any puddle larger than a saucer. You step outside and immediately question your decision. The streets are bustling slick with mud soot, and is that blood number tomato? Hopefully. Your options for getting around are as limited as they are baffling. There's the horse-drawn omnibus, a clattering 2-story nightmare that jerks like a ship in a storm. There's the hansom cab, a faster but pricier 2-wheeled taxi driven by men who seem to be actively trying to kill you with corners. Or, if you're especially brave or broke, you walk. Walking is technically free, but also a full-body hazard. The streets are crowded with vendors, children, dogs, and an alarming number of chickens. Cartwheels rattle past your knees, and chimney sweeps dart between wagons like soot-covered mice. You dodge a fishwife tossing heads into the gutter and sidestep a street preacher warning about frogs falling from heaven. Historians still debate how anyone survived Victorian traffic. There were no traffic lights, no pedestrian crossings, and absolutely no sympathy from carriage drivers. If you got run over by a cart, it was your fault for existing in the wrong place. You try to follow the locals' lead, move quickly, never make eye contact, and walk like you know where you're going, even if it's straight into a wall. A passing cab splashes you with what you desperately hope is just rainwater. Spoiler, it's not. You duck into a narrow alley, hoping for a shortcut. Mistake. It's darker, damper, and filled with laundry hung so low it slaps you in the face. A small boy dashes past. Yelling, Mum says it's your turn to feed the duck. You don't ask questions. Eventually, you emerge back onto a main road. Above you, a sign points toward the Thames embankment, which you avoid because rumor has it bodies wash up there like misplaced laundry. Instead, you follow the stream of workers headed to a textile factory, blending in as best you can. It's only 8 a.m., and you're already exhausted. You hear the clatter of hooves behind you and leap onto a stoop, just in time to avoid a cart loaded with barrels labeled "not poison." That's not comforting. Still, you're learning. The street vendors' calls are starting to make sense. You recognize that hot pies doesn't guarantee warmth or pie, but it's probably edible. You can tell the difference between chimney soot and coal ash. And you've accepted that puddles are basically moral tests. Avoid them all, no matter how dry they look. One of the greatest challenges in Victorian London wasn't just avoiding disease, it was simply staying upright. Streets were uneven, slick, and full of things best left unidentified. Cobblestones shifted underfoot like bad intentions, and horse droppings were more common than daisies. But for now, you've made it to the corner. You haven't been trampled, mugged, or accidentally enlisted in the Navy. You're still hungry. You're still filthy. But you're still here. And that, in Victorian terms, is practically a miracle. You've earned a break, or at least some hydration. You spot a water pump on the corner, gleaming slightly in the hazy light. A woman in a bonnet fills her tin cup and drinks deeply. You're parched, aching, and beginning to wonder how long a human can survive on stewed boot. But then your instincts kick in. Something's wrong. You approach the pump, hand outstretched, when a passerby jerks their head in your direction. Don't touch that, he hisses, unless you want the run so bad, you'll need to rent a second pair of trousers. He's gone before you can ask questions. You back away, and just like that, you've had your first brush with cholera. Victorian London's drinking water was often pulled from the same source where people dumped their waste, the Thames. Entire neighborhoods relied on contaminated pumps. Jon Snow, not the brooding northerner from TV, but the actual one, famously traced a cholera outbreak to one such pump in 1854. Historians still argue whether people truly believed the bad air miasma theory or just didn't want to face the truth about their drinking habits. So, how did anyone stay hydrated? Tea. Endless, boiling, borderline obsessive quantities of tea. It wasn't just cultural, it was survival. Boiling water for tea killed most of the bacteria, and the tannins in black tea added mild antiseptic properties. Children drank it, workers carried it in flasks, and even the poorest Londoners found ways to get their daily dose. You duck into a modest tea shop, threadbare curtains, cracked tiles, a strong scent of mildew and bergamot. The woman behind the counter doesn't greet you. She pours a chipped cup from an iron kettle and pushes it towards you wordlessly. It's hot, slightly bitter, and absolutely divine. A boy nearby stirs his with a candy stick and gives you a gummy grin. An old man reads the newspaper aloud, and Fragment's queen's hair caught fire again. Factory explosion. Fog advisory well, of course. You sip slowly, feeling warmth return to your fingers. Even your bones relax. Water, unless boiled, is off the menu. But here's the odd part. Milk is somehow worse, often watered down, stored in lead containers, or transported in reused gin bottles. It could carry everything, from typhoid to tuberculosis. Even fresh milk wasn't safe. It just hadn't had time to become actively malicious yet. Some enterprising souls added chalk to thicken it. Others sweetened sour milk with sugar and hoped you wouldn't notice. A boy walks past hawking pure lemonade, which you now understand likely involves 0 lemons. Milk of the Poppy shouts another offering laudanum-laced tonic for babies and the occasional adult who just wants to forget they drank rainwater off a church roof. You down the last of your tea, tip a coin onto the counter, and step back into the fog. Hydrated. Slightly caffeinated, not yet dead. It's a good day. You've just begun to feel vaguely human again when a familiar bubbling sound draws your attention. Soup. Yes, that same gurgling menace from earlier in the day. This time, it's coming from a kitchen tucked behind a butcher's stall where 2 apprentices are arguing about whether this batch needs more onions or less hoof. You hesitate at the threshold. The truth is, soup in Victorian London could be a silent killer, and not just from the questionable meat floating in it. No, the real danger lurks in the cookware. Pots made from lead pewter or poorly glazed ceramics leach toxins into whatever simmered inside them. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of lead-lined cooking vessels was ignorance or sheer economic necessity. Either way, it turned stews into slow poisons. But the ingredients themselves didn't help. The meat usually offcuts, which sounds quaint, until you realize it meant lungs, lips, and bits that even rats would sniff and walk away from. Sometimes labeled plucks, this mess was bought by the pound and boiled until vaguely chewable. The vegetables picture cabbage that's seen better centuries, potatoes with more eyes than a gossiping widow, carrots that look like ancient scrolls, and the flavoring salt maybe, more often soot. Real, actual from the fire soot was sometimes added for color. You can't make this up. You watch as the apprentices dump a bucket into the cauldron. It sloshes with a sound like betrayal. One of them tosses in something gray. It might have been meat at some point. It might also have been a hat. You step back. You've already survived one questionable stew today, and your intestines are still on speaking terms with you. No need to push it. Instead, you listen. An older woman nearby, elbows deep in pastry dough, mutters about the soup kitchens popping up around the city. Philanthropic institutions often run by churches or reformers, they offered watery gruel and stiff moral lectures to the destitute. The food was barely nourishing, but at least it was hot and free. Still, not without danger. One kitchen famously served a lentil soup that caused mass fainting later traced to ergot, a fungus from damp rye flour. Another handed out beef broth so salty that recipients required medical attention. The line between nourishment and nap-inducing neurotoxin was blurry. You recall the chemist's advertisements from earlier Dr. Wiggins's anti-soup elixir neutralizes all known stews. Sounds like a joke, isn't. The real kicker. Victorians were aware something was off. Newspapers ran exposés on soup crimes, reporting with mild horror on ingredients like boiled horse sinew or reclaimed fish bones. But the poor had no options. Hot was better than nothing. Tasty was a bonus. Safe was a luxury. You think back to the man slurping outside the pub. Did he know? Did he care? Survival wasn't about thriving. It was about staying upright until tomorrow. A cat prowls along the windowsill, eyes fixed on the bubbling pot. You swear, even it looks uncertain. You walk away, hands in your coat pockets, stomach grumbling again. But you've learned a lesson. In Victorian London, soup is never just soup. At this point, you're a little wiser, a little hungrier, and increasingly suspicious of any food that makes a sound. But survival in Victorian London isn't just about what you eat. It's also about what clings to you. And right now, you're realizing something else. You smell like you've lost a bet with a chimney. Hygiene isn't optional here. It's strategy. You pass a signboard that reads, "Public baths, 2D, tempting." Public bathhouses were among the few communal sanctuaries in a city that otherwise offered very few safe spaces. For the price of a coin or two, you could scrub off a week's worth of soot, share a wooden tub with strangers, and maybe leave with the same number of lice you arrived with if you were lucky. You push open a heavy door and are greeted by warm steam and the overpowering scent of coal soap and boiled humanity. The attendant, a man with a mustache that appears to have its own opinions, gestures toward a row of tubs and grunts. Pick one. Don't linger. You strip settle in and realize the water is barely warm and the tub might predate Roman Britain. Still, it's better than standing under a rain gutter and calling it a shower. You scrub with a slab of soap so harsh it feels like exfoliating with gravel and regret. A woman in the next tub hums a tune that might be God Save the Queen or might be a warning. Historians still debate how frequently Londoners actually bathed. Some insisted on weekly scrubs. Others believed a good brushing and a spritz of lavender did the trick. The working class often went weeks without washing properly, especially in winter, when frozen pipes and icy tiles made bathing a near punishment. And then there were chamber pots. In your lodging house, you quickly learned that flushing toilets were a rich man's novelty. For everyone else, the chamber pot was standard. Kept under the bed or behind a curtain, it served its purpose poorly. Once full, the contents were dumped into the street, ideally into the gutter. Though ideally is a generous term. You've seen it, you've heard it, you've dodged it. One morning, a boy yelled "Gardaloo" from a window before flinging the contents of his pot onto the cobblestones below. You didn't know what Gardaloo meant then. You do now. You still have the stain on your coat. The soap you just used likely made from a mix of animal fat and lye. Occasionally, fancier versions were scented with carbolic acid, refreshing. You dry off with a towel that's more thread than fabric, and dress again feeling marginally cleaner and vastly more paranoid about sitting on anything upholstered. Back on the street, your skin tingles. It might be cleanliness. It might be a rash. Either way, you now understand that hygiene here isn't about vanity, it's about defense. Against lice, against fleas, against illness. You pass a sign advertising tooth elixir for a shining grin. Don't trust it. Victorian dental hygiene involved powders made of crushed brick snuff or even sugar. Toothbrushes, available but expensive. Most people used rag sticks or just didn't. You resolved to smile less just to be safe. And as you walk slightly cleaner and significantly more cautious, you remember what the bathhouse attendant muttered on your way out. You'll be dirty again in an hour anyway. He wasn't wrong. You emerge from the bathhouse feeling marginally more human, which in this city might qualify as a luxury. But your reprieve is short-lived. The fog rolls thicker now, clinging to your boots and the edges of your coat. The gas lights flicker, making every alley look like the entrance to a Dickensian fever dream. You huddle deeper into your clothes and suddenly remember what you wear might just be the difference between survival and suspicion. Clothing in Victorian London wasn't just about fashion, it was a signal. A worn hat, a loose collar, or muddy boots could brand you a vagrant or worse, an easy target. You duck into a second-hand shop tucked between a pawnbroker and a tavern. The proprietor, a bony man with pince-nez glasses and a suspiciously cheerful cat, gestures you toward a rack of coats and trousers. You flip through woolen jackets with frayed cuffs, trousers patched with odd fabrics, and a disturbing number of garments with blood-like stains. Character, the shopkeeper explains, seeing your expression. Eventually, you settle on a dark overcoat that fits reasonably well and smells only mildly of onions. You add a hat bowler style, slightly dented, good enough to pass as a low-level clerk. You're blending in. Historians still debate whether corsets or starched collars were more suffocating. For women, corsets cinched the waist to unnatural proportions, often restricting breathing and damaging ribs. For men, stiff shirt fronts, tight waistcoats, and wool from head to toe ensured you sweated through winter while catching pneumonia. The poor couldn't afford new clothes, so garments were worn threadbare, repaired, and repurposed. A man might wear his grandfather's boots, patched so many times they resembled papier-mâché. A woman's shawl might have begun life as a curtain. But here's the practical truth. People noticed what you wore. Dress too well, and you'd be pegged as a mark. Dress too poorly, and you might be barred from shops, arrested for loitering, or mistaken for someone contagious. You spot a mirror. It's foggy, cracked, and distorts your face like a funhouse lens. Still, you look passable. Not clean exactly, but indistinct enough to survive. Your boots squelch as you walk, and you feel the damp beginning to creep through your socks. That's the next purchase, thick, dry wool, if you can find it. You round a corner and nearly run into a constable. He eyes you, lingers a second, then nods. Your coat passed the test. You exhale and keep walking your pace, steady, your head down. You're learning the city's code blend, adapt, vanish into the crowd, and above all, wear the right hat. It begins with a cough. You barely register it at first, just a dry hack from somewhere behind you, echoing off the brick alley walls, like the scrape of boots or a muttered insult. But then another joins it, then another, until it sounds like half the street is trying to clear their lungs of coal dust and melancholy. And maybe they are. Victorian London's air was a thick stew of smoke, fog, and industrial emissions, so much so that the era coined the term London particular to describe its signature yellow-gray haze. Not just mist, not just pollution. A clinging, choking fog that seeped into lungs, bedsheets, and bones. You wrap your scarf tighter and cross the street to avoid a man who's doubled over, coughing into a handkerchief. You catch a glimpse of red, blood. Not a good sign. The city is sick. Tuberculosis, known then as consumption, was rampant, so common that it featured in poetry fashion and novels as both a romantic and deadly affliction. People wasted away beautifully pale and tragic. But behind the myth was the reality: weeks of coughing blood loss fever and a slow decline with no cure in sight. Historians still debate the full extent of airborne disease transmission during this period, but one thing is certain: proximity was peril. A single cough in a crowded omnibus could spell your fate. And you're not just worried about TB. There's influenza, diphtheria, bronchitis, typhoid, each with its own subtle warning signs and little sympathy for the unprepared. One wrong bus ride, one shared spoon, one unfortunate trip to a particularly grimy tea shop, and you could be bedridden by dusk. You pass a ragged sign for a vapor room advertising healing fumes for the lungs. You keep walking. No need to pay someone to hotbox you with questionable herbs. A street preacher warns about the wages of sin while coughing into his sleeve. His congregation nods and backs away slowly. You don't blame them. Your best defense space, fresh air, if you can find it, and the Victorian equivalent of social distancing. You avoid crowds. You skip that tempting-looking bakery with the long line. You walk a full circle around a group of dock workers clustered near a fire. At a corner, you hear a sneeze and flinch like someone drew a weapon. A nearby woman gives you an approving nod. You're starting to get it now. In Victorian London, a cough was more than a nuisance. It was a warning, a signal, a declaration of invisible war. Reading someone's body language could save your life. So when the man across the street sneezes into his hand, wipes it on his trousers, and then reaches for the same doorknob you were about to touch, you pivot and keep walking. Live to cough another day. By now, you've mastered the art of strategic avoidance. You dodge puddles like they owe you money. You interpret coughs like omens. And still, one truth haunts you: you do not belong here. It's not the clothes you've blended well enough. It's not the language you've picked up. Just enough Cockney slang to be dangerous. It's the small things. How you pause before crossing a street. The way you flinch when someone offers you a bite of something special. The fact that you still walk with purpose instead of defeat. Victorians didn't trust the unfamiliar. Stand out, and you risk being labeled a fraud, a foreigner, or worst of all, French. So you adapt. You stop smiling at strangers. You narrow your eyes just enough to suggest you've seen things. You practice a subtle limp, not enough to look injured, just enough to say, "I've been around." You start saying "ta" instead of "thank you," and learn that "I'm famished" sounds more suspicious than "could eat a crust I could." Historians still argue about the exact origins and spread of Cockney rhyming slang, but for now, it's your shield. You hear someone say, "Use your loaf," and you know head. Loaf of bread. Head. You nod solemnly, like you understood that the first time. You discover the rules of pub etiquette. Don't talk to the barkeep unless spoken to. Don't linger in the doorway. Always know your order. If you're offered gin, decline if it's glowing. If someone offers you mother's ruin, pretend to laugh. It's gin. It's always gin. At the tea house, you learn to stir your tea quietly and never put your elbows on the table unless you want to be mistaken for a dockhand or worse, a radical. You sit quietly at a park bench, feeding crumbs to pigeons, and eavesdropping on two older women debating whether Queen Victoria's latest portrait makes her look stern or just annoyed. You offer no opinion. You nod thoughtfully. And it works. People stop staring. The street preacher ignores you. A baker's assistant calls you Gov without sarcasm. You get jostled like a local cursed at, like a neighbor. You have, in the eyes of Victorian London, become unremarkable. That's the goal. In a city this crowded, anonymity is armor. If no one notices you, no one questions you. If no one questions you, you can keep moving, eating, living. You pass a mirror cracked, of course, and hardly recognize the figure staring back. Not because your coat is different or your face is smudged, it's the eyes. Tired, watchful, just a touch wary. You've stopped asking for directions. You know the way. You nod at a passing chimney sweep. He nods back. Congratulations. You've become just another Londoner, so you're dressed the part, dodging cholera and successfully not dying of soup. Now it's time to find work, because if you don't earn, you don't eat. And in this fog-soaked city, hunger isn't poetic, it's terminal. You scan the notice boards, peeling handbills promising respectable employment for sober gentlemen or willing girls of character needed. No experience necessary. You read between the lines. Most of these are not ideal. The coal yards are hiring, but you'd be coughing black within the hour. Chimney sweep. Technically illegal to send children up flues now, but there's always a loophole. You're too big to climb, too slow to dodge. Pass. You consider matchbox assembly. Painfully tedious, but relatively safe if you don't mind developing phossy jaw, a condition where white phosphorus exposure causes your jawbone to literally rot. Attractive. There's a long line at the textile mill. Women and girls, mostly huddled with shawls and stained fingers. 10-hour shifts, deafening machines, relentless foremen. Wages so low they barely count. You walk on. Eventually, you land at a stationery shop, advertising for an envelope folder, quick hands preferred. You duck inside. The clerk eyes you with the weary recognition of someone who's hired 400 hopefuls and retained 4. You fold neatly, fast. Don't lick the glue. 1 penny per 100. That's it. You nod. You fold. It's mindless, papery purgatory, but your lungs are clear and your bones are unbroken. By Victorian standards, it's practically a dream job. Historians still debate the long-term effects of factory work on child development. But they all agree it wasn't great. Children as young as 5 worked full days. Adults often worked 6 or 7 days a week with no protections, no unions, and no expectation of improvement. You hear about pure finders, people who scoured the streets for dog droppings to sell to tanners, or mudlark scavengers along the Thames foreshore digging through slime for coins, nails, or dead men's buttons. Legal? Not really. Profitable? Barely. Dangerous? Always. You're lucky. The stationery shop offers basic shelter tea once a day, and you get to keep your own shoes. A fellow folder gives you a tip. If they ask you to help with the glue pot run, that's code for extra work, no pay. You nod solemnly. By day's end, your fingers ache and your shoulders feel like you've been beaten with a typewriter. But you've earned a few pennies, and more importantly, a reason not to be hauled off as a vagrant. You buy a heel of bread and a lump of cheese, real cheese, not the rubbery fake stuff, and sit on a stoop, watching the city whirl past. You're employed, not safely, not permanently, but you're earning, and that means you're surviving. Tomorrow, you'll do it all again. And maybe, just maybe, you'll ask if the tea has milk before drinking it. By now, you've earned your bread, folded a forest's worth of envelopes, and avoided most deadly stews. But there's one danger you can't outrun with a quick step or clever hat the authorities. Victorian London's social safety net was a bit like a spider's web sticky complex and designed to trap the already struggling. The most feared entanglement: the workhouse. Workhouses were institutions meant to assist the poor, but in practice they were more like punishment with a roof. Run by stern beetle types and managed with all the compassion of a rusted gate hinge, they divided families, stripped away possessions, and offered barely edible gruel in exchange for soul-numbing labor. You pass one now, an iron-gated monstrosity with barred windows and a sign that reads St. Eustace Union Workhouse, Industry, Temperance, Discipline. The people going in aren't coming out soon. You clutch your coat tighter and keep moving. The trick you've learned is to look just barely respectable. Too clean, and you're a fraud. Too dirty, and you're a suspect. You want to hover in that sweet spot of forgettable. Bobbies, London's uniformed police are always watching. Not always cruel, but often curious. And curiosity, here is bad news. You spot one now standing at a corner helmet, shining, twirling a baton with mild menace. You do not make eye contact. Victorian law enforcement wasn't as violent as you'd expect, but it wasn't exactly gentle. Pickpocketing, begging, even loitering could earn you a stint in the cells. And you don't have a real address, an identity, or a plausible reason to be in 1870s London, so you walk with purpose. If stopped, you've rehearsed a story. Apprentice to Mr. Cartwright at the stationer's off Holborn. A fake name, a real place, just believable enough to buy time. You learn where not to go: courthouses, parish offices, charity halls, with more forms than food. These places exist to help, but they also love paperwork, and nothing exposes a time-traveling imposter faster than paperwork. Historians still argue about how many laws were actually enforced versus how many just existed to scare people. Vagrancy, for example, could mean anything from sleeping rough to simply looking like you might. It was the legal equivalent of, we'll know it when we see it. So you make allies. The tea house lady who lets you warm your hands near the kettle. The tobacconist who doesn't ask questions. A boy named Alfie who knows which constables are just tired and which ones like trouble. It's all a balancing act. You don't draw attention. You don't raise your voice. You don't ask for help unless you already know the answer. And most importantly, you never, ever go near the workhouse clerk's desk. You've avoided the soup, survived the smog, and folded more envelopes than any sane person should. But now, you're faced with something even trickier than Victorian plumbing people. Making friends in Victorian London isn't as simple as striking up a chat. It's more like cautiously navigating a minefield while blindfolded and holding a cup of lukewarm tea. One wrong word, and you're either ignored, pickpocketed, or involuntarily engaged. Still, loneliness is dangerous too. Go too long without allies, and you risk losing more than your coins. You lose information, gossip warnings, the little clues that keep you a step ahead of misfortune. So where do you start pubs, of course? But not the gleaming gin palaces lit up like theater sets. You want the quiet ones, the ones with crooked stools, and locals who glance up from their pints just long enough to assess whether you're trouble. You step into the pickled turnip, barely lit thick with pipe smoke, and exactly the sort of place where you don't sit until you're told. You order mild ale, safe, weak, warm, and keep your elbows in. Nobody says hello. That's a good sign. You sip. You wait. Eventually, a man with a face like a weathered boot slides onto the bench across from you. "You from Camden?" he asks. "No," you say, carefully neutral. He nods once. "Didn't think so." And just like that, you've made your first non-enemy. Historians still debate the depth of working-class community bonds in Victorian cities. Some say they were tight-knit. Others say they were wary and transactional. But one thing's clear. If you're polite, helpful, and occasionally funny, you're far more likely to be accepted. You meet a washerwoman named Elsie, who laughs like a carriage wheel losing a spoke. She teaches you how to haggle for bruised apples and which newsboys won't shortchange you. There's a cobbler who lets you sit in his doorway when it rains in exchange for sweeping. He hums while he works and tells you every customer's secrets. He knows everyone by their boots. And then there's Alfie again, the boy who seems to have 6 jobs and no parents. He teaches you to whistle a warning when the constables do their rounds. He swears he once found a shilling in a dead man's waistcoat, and you don't ask questions. The key you learn is trust earned in teaspoons. Don't ask too many questions. Share what you know, but not too much. Buy the next round if you can. Never brag. Never lie, at least not badly. And if someone saves you from a bar fight or helps you up when you slip in something unspeakable, you owe them. Not forever, but definitely for a pie or two. Eventually, someone calls you a good egg. It's quiet, said offhand, but it sticks with you. In this world, being a good egg means you're honest or at least reliable. That you don't steal or you do it neatly. That you won't vanish with someone's coat or rat them out for 2 pence. You're still a stranger here, but now you've got company. And in Victorian London, that might just save your life. Despite all your efforts, cleaning dodging coughs, avoiding suspicious puddles, and people who sneeze with flair, you wake up one morning with a chill in your bones and a throat like scorched leather. You're sick. At first you tell yourself it's just the damp, just the fog, just the fact that you slept next to someone who sneezed rhythmically for 7 straight hours. But as the day wears on, your head throbs, your joints ache, and you're sweating under your coat in 5-degree weather. Time to seek help. But Victorian medicine is a gamble all its own. You stagger toward a shop with a painted sign of a mortar and pestle. Inside wooden shelves, a bell that tinkles ominously, and rows of brown bottles that smell like menthol misery and a hint of burnt toast. The apothecary looks up. He's older than sin and wearing spectacles so thick they could serve soup. "What's the trouble then?" he rasps. "You describe your symptoms." He nods as if diagnosing a ghost. Could be catarrh, might be fever, or just poor moral fiber. He offers you a small bottle labeled Elixir of Dr. Willoughby's most beneficent cordial with laudanum. You eye the label. It contains opium and probably alcohol, and maybe a hint of belladonna. In Victorian London, almost everything came laced with something mildly narcotic. Babies were dosed with soothing syrup to keep them quiet. Cough syrups contained heroin. Headache powders came with a free existential crisis. You'd be surprised if your envelope glue didn't also contain morphine. Still, you buy the elixir. Because the other option is lying in a freezing alley and hallucinating Queen Victoria riding a fog unicorn. You take a swig. Instant warmth. Your headache recedes. You can breathe through one nostril again. You may or may not be able to feel your eyebrows, but you're upright, and that counts. Historians still debate how much of Victorian medicine was helpful versus harmful. Germ theory was gaining ground by the 1870s, but not everyone accepted it. Some still believed illness came from imbalanced bad air or divine punishment. Bleeding had fallen out of fashion, but leeches were still around if you found the right back alley practitioner. Doctors cost money. Hospitals were crowded filthy and often avoided unless absolutely necessary. Many preferred the corner chemist. At least there, the pain came with a pleasant buzz. You spend the rest of the day in a daze, clutching your bottle and mumbling about soup conspiracies. People avoid you, which is good. It means you don't spread whatever it is you've caught. You sleep in a quiet doorway, wrapped in your coat, dreaming of modern medicine and clean sheets. You'll recover, probably. At least your fever dreams are entertaining. And in the morning, you wake up still breathing, which in Victorian London is basically a miracle. You've been in Victorian London long enough to stop counting the days. At first, every moment felt like a trial. The soup was suspicious, the fog was lethal, and every hat-wearing stranger could be a thief or a tax collector or both. But now, something's shifted. You've stopped reacting to the smell of coal smoke with visible horror. You navigate the cobbled streets like you've always known them. You know where to find bread for half price and where not to step after sunset. You've learned to avoid eye contact with the man who sells magic cough coins. You've become unremarkable, and that's the goal. Being remarkable in Victorian London got you noticed. Noticed meant questioned. Questioned meant trouble. But now you blend in with the crowd, just another soot-dusted figure wrapped in wool and wariness. Your coat is properly worn. Your boots have the right creak. You don't flinch when someone hurls a bucket of mystery liquid from a window. You instinctively avoid gutters and duck into alleyways when the constables patrol too slowly. You've acquired a scar on your knuckle from a folding accident. You've learned how to haggle without sounding desperate and how to say thank you without sounding posh. You know which pubs don't water down the ale and which ones definitely do. You even know how to fake an acceptable cough. Not too wet, not too theatrical. The tea lady calls you dear. The cobbler grunts when he sees you, which is in this era practically a hug. You've stopped looking up in awe at the buildings. You don't marvel at gas lamps or jump at carriage horns. You don't wince when someone offers you stew. You just shake your head and say, "Had it earlier, thanks." Historians still argue about what defined a true Londoner in the 1870s. Was it birthplace, accent resilience? But you know now it's about endurance. It's about survival by small choices. It's about knowing the rules and breaking them carefully. You wake, eat fold, walk, nod sleep, repeat. And you do it all with a level of dull competence that would make a time-traveling version of yourself both proud and a little alarmed. And somewhere along the way, the city stops trying to kill you quite so actively. That's how you know you've made it. You're not thriving. You're not comfortable. But you are surviving. And you haven't eaten soup in weeks. Congratulations. You're officially Victorian.